So good morning to all of you, and those of you who have been here for a while know that we do this Cum Laude celebration every year, and it's I think it's one of the most important meetings we have because it's a way to celebrate the leading scholars on the campus. And I generally offer a few remarks. I want to offer some very brief ones today and some thinking I've been doing about the kind of education we provide here. I shared some of these thoughts with parents on Parents' Day. And it has really to do with my reflecting on the model of education we have here and that you all know. And if you go back to my opening meeting, you remember I spoke about the way Horace Taft founded the school, and you'll recall I said that he was a little bit adrift. He did not have much educational experience. He'd been tutoring for 3 years. And he'd started the school almost by accident, but he was very clear on the model that he wanted to provide. There was no doubt, there was no hand-wringing, no anxiety about the model he was going to provide. And what he provided was, and what he believed strongly in, was a broad liberal education, which was one of the whole student. And that was a phrase he used often, and we have always used it here. That is, the education of the whole student. And what it meant was a reverence for and mastery of past knowledge, that is, a deep respect for all the great ideas and important information of the past. It was the pursuit of inquiry and critical thinking and asking tough questions. And it was finally really the cultivation of the self, of the moral self, so that in all ways what an education at Taft would be a coming to understand the self and an acquisition of the skills that he felt were critical to being a good citizen. And he was clear about this. And by the way, the model was one that was shared by all the great schools at the time. And in his memoirs, he speaks about his friends and his colleagues at the great schools, the Exeters and Deerfields, Hotchkisses, St. Paul's, Andovers, and so on. And all were in agreement that this kind of broad education was the model we needed. This is what universities expected. This is what families expected. And we still employ it, a broad education that's intellectual, that is moral, that is physical, that is spiritual, and is artistic or aesthetic. And there was no questioning about this. He talked about that model often. He called it and I quote here, a backbone of studies which constitute a general education. Again, that idea that this is a general approach to education. In another metaphor, he wrote in his memoirs that he was trying to provide at Taft a foundation on which to build either in knowledge or in training. Again, that idea that this is a broad approach to education and that it is a cultivation of the whole self. But what's interesting is, while I take this for granted in some ways, and while I believe in it deeply, there's a lot of questioning about this model today. There are many who argue that it is too expensive, that it is only for the privileged elite. There are some who argue that it does not really work in a global job market that's technologically driven. There are some who argue that it really leads to kind of superficial exposure to special issues taught by disengaged faculty at the college level. And so there's a lot of pushback on the very model that we believe in, that we've been doing for 125 years, and that you're experiencing. And the most provocative critic, and I recommend this book, not that you have time, but if you want to read a fascinating book, it's by a guy named William Dershowitz, and it's getting a ton of attention right now. And the book's called Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite. Now you can guess from the title what the thesis is in a way. It is a scathing, angry work. It's brilliant. He is a former Yale professor. He's a Columbia graduate. And as someone who's a product of liberal education, he clearly sees the value of it. And I would argue that his ability to make such an argument is a result of a great liberal education that he's received. But he argues that it's not working, and that this model of education, and by implication he's talking about Taft, he says all it's producing is this idea of excellent sheep. And the problem, he says, is that unless there are significant changes, it's going to continue to produce those kind of graduates. This is what he writes in the introduction. The system manufactures, again, be an English student and think about the connotations of the language. The system manufactures students who are smart and talented and driven, yes, but also anxious, timid, and lost, with little intellectual curiosity and a stunted sense of purpose. Trapped in a bubble of privilege, heading meekly in the same direction, great at what they're doing, but no idea why they're doing it. He's talking about you, right? And then he says, once students arrive at college, and I quote, he says, through the gates of Amherst or Dartmouth, many kids find they have no idea why they are there. University students, he observes, carry toxic levels of anxiety and aimlessness. They sell their souls at the altar of conformity. They only follow the herd to the same very few financial careers. And he writes in the end of the introduction, liberal arts has become a put-down, and English major a punchline. It's a really powerful work. He says, in short, private education, the liberal education that we know, is churning out just excellent sheep. Now, as you can imagine, I disagree with him vehemently. I have to. How could I get up and come to work every day if I believe that what we're doing is producing, when I handed a diploma, that I was handing a diploma to just one more excellent sheep? We don't do that, I believe. And I guess I would ask you, do you agree with him? Do you feel that what you're experiencing at Taft, what you're discovering every day with the teachers you have in and out of the classroom, that you will leave here with little intellectual curiosity, with a stunted sense of purpose, that you are anxious and timid and lost? Now, I believe the opposite, obviously. I think that Taft provides a rock-solid proof, absolutely clear evidence that, in fact, a broad liberal education can produce the exact opposite of what he's saying. That when you graduate, my hope is, and my confidence is, that you're going to be strong and brave and independent and a moral lifelong learner. And that's because everything we do in and out of the class, and everything that brilliant and passionate and challenging and tough teachers do, is aimed at creating graduates that look very different than what he's described. I would argue this: if you work hard, and if we work hard as a faculty, you're going to become confident and courageous and challenging thinkers. And to be clear, that is what Horace Taft was trying to create with this model. Liberal education explicitly tries to do this. That is, and understand the balance. A liberal education that you're experiencing here is simultaneously trying to create a reverence for the past and past knowledge. And that's why we teach all the world's great ideas. That's why it's Shakespeare and Euclid and Locke, Archimedes, Flaubert, and Mozart. We hope that you will develop a respect for the past and a mastery of the past knowledge. But we also want something else. We want you to be deeply skeptical and doubting about all that you have learned. And we want you to be both reverential and skeptical. And that leads to this very interesting paradox, that we are doing our job as teachers to the extent to which you are willing to question us. I think a lot of really good things happen, and critical things happen in the world, if we develop courageous and challenging thinkers. That's how terrible ideas are challenged. That's how innovation occurs. That's how engagement in civic affairs happens. So we are hoping that you become courageous and challenging. Second thing, I'd say this: if you work hard and we work hard, we will also have graduate humble students who are aware of what they don't know. It's a good thing. Humility is a good thing, not a bad thing. It's not the opposite of confidence. I would argue it is confidence. That if we hope that in learning, the learning you have here, you will understand your own blindness. You'll be able to learn what you do not know. You'll become aware of perspectives that are utterly foreign to you. And so you'll be made to stretch, to feel uncomfortable. Teachers will continually ask you to consider something you've never thought before. And in that sense, humility is a really useful quality. I'd like to think that what you experience here is a coherent and carefully crafted effort to make you perpetually encounter your own blindness and see today what you could not see yesterday. And then I'd say third, if you work hard, and if we work hard, you're going to gain an empathy that I think is both practical and morally right. In a world where I think the ability to see the perspectives of others very different than you is absolutely vital. You will not thrive, you will not lead unless you can do that. And I don't mean empathy in some kind of fluffy, kumbaya, I feel your pain kind of sense. I mean a deep, authentic awareness of how someone who looks different than you, who has a very different lens than you, and your ability to view the world through their eyes. You may not agree, and I would argue, if you're a courageous thinker, you'll be willing to challenge them, but that you will have an awareness and an empathy for and a respect for those who view the world differently than you. It is the most important skill. Every CEO who gets interviewed says, I need someone who can do that. I need people who can build bridges, who can look beyond their own experience. So if I left you with a question today, in a day in which what we're doing is celebrating scholarship, celebrating the best learners on the campus, celebrating those who have achieved the highest level, I would ask this of you, and I think you should ask this quite seriously and consciously of yourself. Will I be an affirmation, or will I be a rejection of the Dershowitz argument that liberal education just produces excellent sheep? I would encourage you to think about that consciously. I encourage you to write about it if you wanted to write an editorial in the Papyrus or elsewhere. Do you believe that what we are doing is an argument for or a rejection of the Dershowitz argument that a broad liberal education, all it does is produce excellent sheep? You know my answer, and my answer is all of you in front of me, and in particular those sitting behind me. And so it's with great sense of honor and congratulations, I'll turn this over to John Wilson as we honor those who are being inducted into Cum Laude. Okay.
A few other acknowledgments. First, two Taft students received commendation from the National Achievement Scholarship Program for their outstanding performance last year on the PSAT, finishing among the highest scoring participants. So please stand, Natasha Batten and Rio Dennis. Now, these 8 students received commendation from the National Merit Scholarship Program for their outstanding performance last year on the PSATs, finishing the top 3.3% of all test takers. Please stand and hold your applause till the end. Bohan Gao, Nicole Jark, Brandon Gia, Eugene Lee, Ezra Levy, Jenna Longo, Anjali Thakur, and Alicia Wang. These were the ranking scholars for last academic year, 2013-2014, with the highest unweighted averages in their classes. Please stand and remain standing when I read your name. First, from the class of 2017, last year's lower mids, with a 97 unweighted average, Sunny An. Class of 2016, last year's mids with a 95.58 unweighted average, Kayla Kim. And we're going to acknowledge 2 from last year's upper mids, the class of 2015. First of all upper mids with a 97.6 unweighted GPA. In absentia is Jack Mee. Turn towards China and clap towards China, Jack Mee. And of returning upper mids with a 97.2 unweighted GPA, Eugene Lee. Okay, now cum laude. Founded in 1908, the Cum Laude Society is the national scholarship society in secondary schools, corresponding to Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Psi in colleges and scientific schools. A maximum of 20% of the senior class may be elected into membership in the Cum Laude Society. This morning, we will induct 14 members of the class of 2015 who merit inclusion in this society based on their academic records for both their middle and upper middle years. At this spring's graduation, this first group will be joined by other seniors whose selection will be based upon their records for their upper mid and senior years. The 14 students inducted this morning represent the top 8% of the class, with weighted averages that for those 2 years ranged from 95.3 to 101.7. Will those being inducted in the Cum Laude Society please come forward when I call your name? Serenity Sriram Bharadwaj. Bohan Gao. Madison Faye Haskins. Sarah Caroline Lako. Se-un Eugene Lee. Ezra Voitila Levy. Iran Bob Meng. Pensari Navaraj. Sun Ho Kelly Park. Rory Joseph Ronan. Jacqueline Harriet Tyson. Alicia Shirley Wong. Sung Jun Kevin Wan. And Nifei Jennifer Tsang.
Well, congratulations to that group of extraordinary scholars, and to all of you. Listen, I know this is a tough time. If I had one last piece of advice, it would be stop bugging me. As I've said to everyone, we will have a holiday this year, okay?